The Toronto Carrying Place, Rediscovering Toronto's Most Ancient Trail. Read by Glenn Turner. This is an excerpt from Chapter 5, Through City Streets. This section is entitled Simcoe's Picnic. 1793, September 25th. About 4 o'clock, it beginning to rain, we encamped on the side of the Humber at the west extremity of the third concession. We here got some wild grapes and a quantity of crayfish. The campers were with Lieutenant Governor Simcoe, and this was Simcoe's first and only trip up the carrying place. His intent was to see for himself how practical the route was for moving goods and troops into the northwest. So far, things had gone quite well. Simcoe had sent an advance party from York to Jean-Baptiste Rousseau's house by boat on September 24th. Accompanied by an armed escort, Simcoe rode out to join them early the following day. It must have taken most of the morning to pack. They were, after all, carrying supplies for over a week, and there were quite a few of them. Simcoe himself, 2 young army officers and their 2 servants, 2 older government officials, 4 Mississauga men, 8 or 9 soldiers from the Queen's Rangers Regiment, and 1 big dog. Horses carried most of the supplies, and Simcoe probably rode his own horse. Everyone else was likely on foot. Tellingly, they took no canoes with them. A late start meant that by 1 o'clock p.m. when they stopped for lunch, they had only made it as far as the Black Creek. Lunches seemed to have been leisurely affairs. The party lingered over a meal for 2 hours on one of the following days, which perhaps explains why, when they finally started up again, they were only a kilometre or so down the road when they stopped again at 4 o'clock p.m. Even I can do better than that. But probably I underestimate the difficulty of the trail in those days. It may well have been slippery, uneven, and treacherous, particularly for horses. By the end of the afternoon on Wednesday, September 25th, Simcoe's expedition was facing a cold rain and had decided that enough was enough. They set up tents on the bank of the Humber, near where I am standing, and started thinking about supper. Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe was 41 years old that year, and absolutely in his prime. Born in England's East Midlands, he was a hero of the American Revolutionary War, and already well known for his energetic administration of the new province of Upper Canada. Simcoe was raised and trained in a tradition of military and civil service. His father had sailed with Captain Cook. His contemporaries were governors, generals, and admirals in far-flung corners of the British Empire. Like colonial officials everywhere, Simcoe had both enormous responsibilities and extraordinary freedom of action. As Lieutenant Governor, he reported in theory to Governor-General Lord Dorchester in Quebec. But Dorchester was far away, out of the country in fact, during Simcoe's first few months in office, and there was bad blood between the 2 men besides. Dorchester imposed his own fairly militaristic vision on Upper Canada when he could, but it was Simcoe who made the dozens of practical daily decisions which shaped the future of Ontario. Simcoe was not a tall man. There are suspicions that he had to buy his way into a grenadier company with height restrictions. Portraits show him with a flushed face and an untidy splash of white hair. Of his energy and stamina there can be no doubt. Though wounded several times in battle or accidents, and frequently ill with asthma or headaches, he rarely slowed down. At home in England, Simcoe would be out riding by 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. On duty in Canada, he was constantly travelling, often in uncomfortable conditions. Professionally, Simcoe's days were filled with land claims, appointments, bureaucratic infighting, negotiations with Americans and natives. Where possible, he avoided confrontation and drama. It's tempting to draw Simcoe as the first quintessential Ontarian. Loyal, dutiful, stoic, pragmatic, sincere but a bit of a bore. More about roads, business and law than about art and love. The embodiment, in fact, of all those upper Canadian values that the rest of Canada used to mock. But this is a caricature, and Simcoe was more than that. The details of his life are the most intriguing. He and his wife Elizabeth had 11 children, excessive even for those days, which must have made for an interesting household. Marrying Elizabeth Postuma Gwilym was the best decision Simcoe ever made. Not only was she an heiress, but her published diary kept his memory alive centuries after his death. He was himself a lifelong writer of letters and poetry. He was one of the first and most successful British commanders of light infantry, the precursors of today's special forces. Worried about the fate of his mostly American-born Queen's Rangers at the end of the Revolutionary War, he encouraged them to try and quietly re-enlist with the victorious rebel armies, and he did his best to eradicate slavery from Upper Canada, a move well ahead of its time. A good and well-rounded man, one has to conclude, not without his faults, but no colourless military bureaucrat either.